Out of the darkness.
Out of the darkness.
Out of the darkness.
Fuera de la oscuridad.
Welcome to the North Carolina Out of the Darkness experience. I'm Bob Gebbia, CEO of AFSP, and I'm grateful to all of you for raising funds and awareness for suicide prevention. In particular, I want to thank Catherine English, our North Carolina Area Director, for inviting me to join you today. And I want to thank the Out of the Darkness walk chairs and their committees for their leadership. Tiara Parsons and Maureen Gould-Bolger for the Charlotte area, Susan Toll and Debbie Howell for Central Piedmont, Rebecca Bradley and April Dupree, Central Carolina, Ashley Brill and April Stuber for Triad area, Ashley Bardsley, Wilmington area, Vanessa Bassett, Sandhills region, Tabitha LaPointe for Onslow County, John Chappell for Greater Elizabeth City, Nicole Rickard, Asheville and Western North Carolina, Macaulay Reese and Amy Baker for Inner Banks, and Jenna Rogers for Goldsboro. I also want to thank our statewide in-kind sponsor, Rob and Associates, for their pro bono advocacy work. And our top lifesaver sponsor is the Iredell Statesville Schools. Thank you all for your leadership. Now, much has changed since last year's Out of the Darkness Community Walk. It's a challenging time. And all of us at AFSP want you to know that our thoughts are with you and your families during this pandemic, and I hope you're staying safe and healthy. I can assure you the pandemic hasn't deterred AFSP from its work. We're continuing our research and our education and our advocacy. And when suicide does occur, we are there to support the families and friends with programs and resources. And from the start of the pandemic, we've been a leading voice about caring for one's mental health and about seeking treatment when needed. And social distancing doesn't mean social isolation. We need to stay in touch with one another and support each other. Now, none of this work would be possible without all of you. We need each of you as our work is more critical than ever. As we know, the suicide rate has continued to trend up. And we're concerned that the isolation and grief and economic impact of the pandemic could contribute to further loss of life from suicide. But we also believe that suicide isn't inevitable, and with greater investment in prevention now, we can avert any increase. So thank you. Thank you for everything you're doing to save lives and bring hope to those affected by suicide. Because of you, we will continue to fight for a day when no one dies by suicide. I look forward to seeing you in person at a future event. But until then, thank you and stay safe. Thank you.
My name is Victor Armstrong, and I serve on the board of directors for American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, North Carolina. You know, I first became interested in suicide awareness and suicide prevention probably 6 years ago, really as a result of working in a hospital system and having worked for a couple of decades in behavioral health. And when I became aware of the impact of suicide on people in the community, and particularly communities of color. That was what piqued my interest, and AFSP just seemed like the right place to get involved because of all the things they were doing in the community and across the state. The work I do with AFSP is really important to me because I think that first and foremost, suicides are preventable deaths. And I think that anything that we can do to try to mitigate those unnecessary deaths in our community, in our state, and our country, I think we all owe it to ourselves to do our part. I think for me, looking at the work that AFSP does, what really interests me the most is their involvement in the community, at the community level, working with school systems, working with local businesses, and working with hospital systems and government, which really gives you the opportunity to touch people where they live and where they work, and just about every place that people frequent, AFSP is going to be there. I think AFSP is one of the few organizations that really touches pretty much every aspect of suicide prevention and awareness. AFSP is one of the leaders in the country in raising awareness about suicide and suicide prevention. One of the leaders also in making resources available to people. The work with suicide loss providers or suicide loss survivors is really huge. So I think AFSP has an impact in a lot of different areas. For me, as someone who works in the behavioral health field, it's also given me an opportunity to educate other people in the field about the prevalence of suicide, how it impacts all of us, including people who work in the behavioral health care field themselves. The one thing I would add is that I always like to stress to people of color. I grew up in Eastern North Carolina, grew up the son of a preacher, and I was always taught that black people are not impacted by suicide. It was something we didn't talk about. And I was also taught growing up in the church that struggling with mental health challenges was a sign of spiritual or moral weakness. None of that is true. I think knowing what we know now, we know that black people, just like everyone else, are impacted by suicide. And in fact, one of the highest rates of suicide is in young black males. So I would encourage people of color, whether it's through your faith-based community, whether it's through community organizations, whether it's through your fraternity, sorority, get involved in suicide prevention, educate our communities, because if we don't, we are complicit in the deaths of our children.
Hello again, everyone. This is John, one of the many volunteers for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention's North Carolina chapter, inviting you to join us to stop suicide. Visit ncprojectredflag.attendees.com. Again, that's ncprojectredflag.attendees.com to learn more.
My name is Bowen Nutting, and I work for the Iredell Statesville Schools. I'm connected to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention because I am an advocate for children in the state of North Carolina, and I realize that the mental health of our children is at stake, and becoming involved in suicide prevention and awareness is absolutely of paramount importance to me. I've been an educator for a long time, and over the course of the years that I've spent in public schools, unfortunately, I know many children that we've lost to suicide. So this topic has become extremely important to me and has touched me multiple times and in multiple ways. I think that it is important for us to understand the need for families and children to have real conversations about their own emotional health. Today is a fast-paced world, and the way that children are learning today and the way that they're interacting with the world is different than when I was a child. And I realize that the fast pace of our world is impacting our children's mental health. And so the American Foundation of Suicide Prevention is so important to me because their mission is to encourage people to have real conversations, to reduce the number of suicides in our country by taking away the stigma that is suicide. It is important for us to talk about our mental health. It is important for us to talk about the value of our lives here on earth. And we want to make sure that children feel comfortable to have those conversations with us. I became involved here with the Central Piedmont Out of the Darkness Walk. We did host that, and we are about to host our third Out of the Darkness Walk. And we've been able to do that in collaboration with the school district and with our community. We've had tremendous support. And I think we are making progress in this little area of North Carolina to reduce the stigma of the discussion of suicide and to encourage people to have real conversations about their mental health. I've become involved in advocating for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention in a number of ways. Actually, you can maybe see the blue streak in my hair is in memory or in honor of American Suicide Prevention Month. And it's been fun to watch as people have asked me about the blue streak in my hair, for me to talk to them and say, it's time for us to have a real conversation about suicide prevention. And did you know that September is Suicide Awareness Month? So I think that it's the small things that we do to advocate for suicide prevention. And it's also the big things like the Out of the Darkness Walk, raising funds for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I'm very, very excited about our 3-digit hotline number. And so I've tried to be an advocate with my elected officials to let them know how important that is to me, that we have a 3-digit hotline for those who are in crisis. And I also just try to have conversations about mental health anytime that I possibly can. I'm interested in talking with children and adults about the fact that it's okay if you're not okay. And it's okay to have conversations if you're sad, if you're depressed, if you're anxious. That's nothing to be ashamed of. And it's something that we all have felt at some point or another. And it's also something that we're all in this together. We're here to help each other. And when you reach out and you have real conversations, it improves everyone's lives. And so I think advocating in a number of ways is important, but it's the small things that matter the most.
So my name's Rob LeMay, and I am AFSP North Carolina's registered lobbyist for state government affairs. And my company, Rob LeMay & Associates, provides those services to AFSP pro bono for free as a way of memorializing my sister who was lost to suicide 7 years ago. When my sister killed herself, that had a devastating impact on me and my family, particularly my youngest daughter, who was very close to my sister. And a number of years after her loss, I was looking around for a way to memorialize Anna Marie, my sister, who was a wonderful person. And I was in a meeting where suicide prevention was being discussed in North Carolina public policy circles, and I discovered that AFSP North Carolina was the only organization in North Carolina that advocates for suicide prevention for all age groups. There are other organizations that will do suicide prevention work for kids and juveniles, but nobody's doing suicide prevention policy work, advocacy, education, support for survivors and family members that AFSP is. And they didn't have a lobbyist, didn't have the resources for a lobbyist. I am a lobbyist. I've been making my living in and around elected officials my entire life. And it just became really obvious to me that my experience with suicide and my experience with the legislature and public policy would be a perfect way to memorialize my sister. So it's not just my work. I'm part of a team that includes hundreds, thousands of AFSP folks across North Carolina, AFSP's North Carolina staff, AFSP's national advocacy staff, where we're all teaming up to talk to policymakers, to talk to elected officials, to talk to the governor about trying to put things in place, appropriations, public policy, laws, change the laws to prevent suicide. And so my job is to walk around in the legislature and walk around in the governor's office and talk to people about changing the laws and increasing budgets to address suicide prevention. And along with my work inside the political process are AFSP staff and volunteers who are outside in their communities calling and writing letters and having conversations with their legislators about budgets and laws. And that team is focused on one goal, which is to put things in place that will prevent suicide. And recently, this year, in 2020, we convinced the legislature after more than 2 years to approve a law that requires all school employees, classified school employees, to get trained in suicide prevention so that when kids come to school and they're showing signs that they're in trouble, a teacher, a principal, a counselor knows what to look for and can reach out to those kids and hopefully, prevent a tragedy. I'm very proud of that work. My very small part in this effort is to help folks who have gone through this process or have lost a loved one or want to, remember a friend or family member who's either survived or maybe not survived suicide, to make their voice heard in the halls of government, in the legislature, to make sure that we're putting things in place that will hopefully prevent this work, or prevent suicide. And so I guess my message to folks who are looking for an opportunity to make something positive out of a tragedy is that I would invite you to be part of our legislative work. The work, unfortunately, of suicide prevention is never going to end. But we have a lot of work to do in North Carolina, and we need everybody's help. So my message is, if you want to help us change the laws, increase budgets, and make it possible to prevent suicide, to prevent more suicides in North Carolina, we'd welcome your participation. We really need you.
I've heard there was a secret chord that David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do ya? Well, it goes like this: the fourth, the fifth, the minor fall, the major lift, the baffled king composing hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Well, your faith was strong, but you needed proof. You saw her bathing on the roof. Her beauty in the moonlight overthrew you. She tied you to the kitchen chair. She broke your throne and she cut your hair. And from your lips she drew the hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Well, baby, I've been here before. I've seen this room and I've walked this floor. I used to live alone before I knew ya. And I've seen your flag on the marble arch. And love is not a victory march. It's a cold and it's a broken hallelujah.
Well, maybe there's a God above, but all I've ever learned from love was how to show somebody how true you are. And it's not a cry that you hear at night. It's not somebody who's seen the light. It's a cold and it's a broken hallelujah. 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 Hallelujah.
So I lost my baby brother to suicide on September 17th, 2014. The year after his death, my family created a team in his honor, Team Greg. So the first year we walked, we were very successful in our fundraising, and I realized the importance of AFSP, and I then proceeded the following year to become the co-chair of the walk with my friend Catherine Falbo Woodson. In the North Carolina chapter of AFSP, like I said, I've been the chair of the walk for 2 years, and presently I just volunteer where is needed. So for instance, I've worked at the Pride Parade, I do suicide prevention courses at some local high schools. A lot of education is really where my focus is today. The work of AFSP is important to me and my family because of the loss of my baby brother. He was 34. He had what appeared to be the perfect life. He was brilliant, funny, intelligent, had a phenomenal job, graduated summa cum laude, spoke fluent Italian. It looked like everything was perfect, but deep down he was suffering from depression, and we didn't know. And ultimately, that depression took his life by suicide. So if suicide could happen to Greg, it could happen to anybody. And we want to spread the voice and be the voice, destigmatize the stigma attached with mental illness, and let everybody know it doesn't discriminate. It can happen to anybody. I think the most valuable work that AFSP does in my community is help destigmatize the stigma associated with mental illness. I believe the walk being such a huge event for such a big city in Charlotte really lets people know the importance of speaking about our mental health like we do our physical health. Education that they provide, the support that they provide for the families. Their Survivors Day has been key for my family for many years. So many great things this organization does, and the way they reach people suffering from mental illness as well as survivors of suicide has impacted our family in more ways than one.
Losing someone to suicide or struggling with a mental health condition can make you feel as if you are alone. It can make you feel as if no one understands what you are going through. Our honor beads are visible symbols of our invisible pain. Each color shows our personal connection to suicide and helps us recognize others who understand our pain. We hope this honor bead ceremony helps you know you are not alone.
The white honor beads symbolize the loss of a child by suicide. I walk today in memory of my daughter, Lindsay.
The red honor beads represent the loss of a spouse or partner to suicide. I wear the red beads for my husband, Brian.
The gold honor beads represent the loss of a parent to suicide. I wear gold for my dad, James.
Orange honor beads represent the loss of a sibling. I wear orange for my brother Travis, Pete, Eddie, and all the other siblings of my friends that I've made at the Out of the Darkness walks.
Hey, my name is Tracy Smith, and we're walking in the Asheville chapter for suicide awareness. Our team name is Mike's Stormwalkers, or Storm Riders for the song. Our bead is purple in remembrance of a relative. I'm walking in remembrance of my brother-in-law, Mike Smith.
I'm walking in remembrance of my dad, Mike Smith. I'm walking in remembrance of my brother, Mike Smith.
Walking in remembrance of my uncle, Mike Smith.
And I'm walking for Mike Smith. I'm his mother.
And Papa
Mike.
Papa.
walk with us and never forget our fight for suicide. It can always happen in your family. We never thought it would happen in ours, but it did. And we'll never give up the fight for Mike. Thank you.
I'm walking in remembrance of my dad, Mike Smith. And Papa.
Silver honor beads represent the loss of a first responder or a military member. I wear these beads in honor of Sergeant Major Todd Parisi, Staff Sergeant Taylor Wilson, and Sergeant Ryan Curtis. Not all wounds are visible.
The green honor beads are worn by those who have a continuing mental health struggle or who have attempted suicide. I wear green for myself.
Teal honor beads represent my support for someone who struggles or has attempted suicide. I wear teal for my friend and a family member.
Blue beads represent our support for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention.
We wear blue for the cause, and so does everyone here today.
It is often said, and very true, that AFSP is a family. We thank these courageous AFSP family members who have shared a piece of their heart with us here today. They represent our dedication, our commitment, and our strength as a community. We are united in our goal and determined to bring suicide prevention out of the darkness and to save more lives in the year ahead. We hope you feel our message of hope and healing. We hope you feel you are a member of the AFSP family. We hope you know that you are not alone.
I think if I were talking to someone who was struggling with suicidal ideation, I would say to them, there's somebody that loves you and that's here to take care of you. And there is an adult, if you're a young person, there is an adult out there that understands exactly how you feel. And we're here to help you. There is a whole world of people that want to support you. And you can be happy and you can live a full and happy life. That is something that is there for you. And we're more than happy to help you find that path and take that journey.
I think the most important thing I want to say to someone who's either struggling with suicide or someone who is a friend, a family member of someone who's struggling with suicide is that you're never alone. There are always people who care, people you can reach out to. I always encourage people to call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255, or you can text 741-741, because you do matter, your life matters, and we want above everything else for you to be here tomorrow and every day after that.
For somebody who's suffering, there is help out there, and you don't need to be afraid to ask, and you don't need to be embarrassed. The stigma and shame associated needs to go, And I think the more we talk about it, the more we realize how many people out there are suffering. And we all should be the voice. We should be looking out for our brothers and sisters to help them feel comfortable enough to reach out. The loss of a family member or a friend by suicide will permanently leave a hole in your heart. I don't want to say things get better, but you learn to live with that loss, and you learn how significant a mental illness is and what it really can do to an individual and to a family member.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us for North Carolina's Out of the Darkness experience. We hope today we've given something to warm your heart. Now it's time to warm those bodies. So go out, stretch, get some physical activity, do what's fun for you in self-care, and let us know at #AFSPNC or #AFSP North Carolina. And thank you so much for all that you do to stop suicide.